1/2 hour presentation, which will end right at 1:30 because of the following speaker, John Anthony West. Jordan Maxwell and I have something in common that we actually share with quite a few people in this field. I say this field. The field of research of unusual phenomena and even unusual politics. And that is that up until, in my case, 1995, I had no formal involvement with this issue at all. I was a read person. I had a life that was, okay. It was nice. I didn't do any harm, but overall it wasn't particularly consequential and amounted to not much at all. And I decided I didn't like that, and I was going to spend the rest of my life doing something meaningful and important that I wanted to do. And so that's exactly what I did. I entered the field in '96. This is not uncommon and not surprising because there are things that people who have mainstream lives and families and relatives and all those obligations and mortgages and so forth, there are places they simply can't go. And they're not going to go, and we respect that. And for others will go there. Jordan essentially had such a life, and because of an absolute obsession with the ancient world, ancient mysteries, magic, and other things, became a self-made researcher, commentator, talk show host, author, totally on his own, self-made. He's had over 600 radio interviews. He's written a number of books. The two lead books are That Old Time Religion and a book and a video he did back in 1989 called The Matrix of Power. There's some prescience there, if you understand what I'm saying. We got the Matrix movies, and now we have the Threat Matrix show, which is based on the Threat Matrix presentation, which goes to every president. So we're going to be hearing a lot about matrices, apparently, for the rest of our lives. But he was already into that in 1989. But I think one of the most significant things he's known for is that he was the driving force behind a 3-show series on CBS television, The Ancient World Mysteries. And I'm almost certain that all of us have probably seen one or two of those at one time or another. He also has the distinction, a non-trivial distinction, of being one of, I don't know if there's others, but he's certainly one person who had his radio program, which was broadcast on a ABC, I believe, affiliate radio station in a major market, was shut down by eliminating the sponsor and the sponsor's website and the sponsor's ability to function in any way under the Patriot Act. John Ashcroft went on the air the other day, and he made the comment, actually he's made a couple comments different times. Basically he said, look, we're doing this by the books, so we're not messing up, and no one has complained. We have not a single complaint about an abuse of power under the Patriot Act outside of the terrorism issue. Actually, it turns out that what he meant to say was no one has had the guts yet or is able to overcome their quite appropriate fears to go public with what's happened to them under the Patriot Act. So that is a significant distinction, and usually that means that you must be doing something interesting to attract that kind of attention. So without any further ado, I want to bring Jordan Maxwell forward here, and he's going to talk about some interesting things. And he will be talking in the future, and you definitely want to catch him at a full-fledged presentation when you have an opportunity.
Thank you very much. This is an impromptu presentation, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you for a few moments. There's an old saying that says, always trust a person looking for truth. Don't ever trust the one who's found it. I have discovered that in order to truly appreciate any subject, you need to, and as an example that I always give, if you're going to look at any subject, think of it like putting a lot of weight on the second floor. You're going to put a huge amount of weight on the second floor of a building. But to make sure the floor can hold it, you go downstairs and go up through the ceiling tiles and check the foundation on which you're going to place that weight. So now what you're doing is you are standing under the subject. And this is where we get the word understanding. You need to go to the basis, the fundamental foundation on which things sit in order to understand. And I have discovered many years ago that words and magical systems dominate the world that we live in. There is, in point of fact, a magical matrix at work. I discovered this a long time ago, and as Stephen brought out, I did a video called Matrix of Power. And I got all kinds of movie stars and motion picture producers and all those kind of people in Hollywood calling me. This was back in '89, talking about the video Matrix. And it was basically what you see in the movie. It talked about how one thing is said to be one thing, it's actually another. And I got phone calls from very famous people telling me they had seen it, and then I was surprised to see later on it comes out in a movie using the same term. But I've always been interested in the occult. Occult is simply a word meaning hidden, and so much of our powers in this world and the way things work are hidden. And the more one looks at this subject of how the world actually works, you begin to see that there's a magical system, and I'm telling you, there really is a magical system dominating the world of the Western civilization. And for 1,000 years before the Roman Empire existed in Northern Europe, basically Western Europe, there was a magical priesthood called the Druids. And the Druids still even exist to this day. And it was a very legitimate political, social, educational, religious institution dominating Europe for thousands of years. And they were referred to as the Druids. They were actually from the Phoenician Canaanite system in the Middle East. The Phoenician Canaanites formed the basis for the ancient Druidic system, and that's even older. But in the ancient Druidic system, there were many powerful symbols and emblems. One of the most interesting symbols in Druidism was a magic wand, like Merlin the magician with his magic wand. Magic wands were always made out of the wood of a holly tree. It was made out of hollywood. And we're still seeing the magic of the wood of the holly tree. Hollywood, motion pictures, television. And once you begin to see the symbols and realize that the symbols for the national coats of arms for countries, the flags, the seals, the presidential seals, the emblems for the logos and emblems on corporations, especially the corporate emblems for motion pictures and television companies like Columbia Broadcasting System. CBS has the eye. The Columbian system goes back to the Columbian faction of the Illuminati back in the early 1700s, not the late 1700s. And you begin to see why space shuttle is called Columbia. You have Columbia University, Columbia Pictures, Columbia Broadcasting. Columbia is a very interesting word, and it's connected to the Jesuits. Incidentally, the Jesuits are very pronouncedly involved in the destiny of this country. The Jesuit order is very much involved in the founding of this country and the direction of its politics. Georgetown University, from which many of the presidents and big shots in government get their education, is a Jesuit university. And once you begin to see how words and terms and symbols are used, and of course symbols are extraordinarily important in world affairs. If you don't think so, if you don't understand the concept of how important symbols are, put a swastika on your arm and go to your local synagogue and watch the reaction you get. Symbols mean things to people. And the powers that be in this world have set up a world of symbols and emblems and terms and catchphrases. And once you understand how this system works, it's fascinating, because for the first time, the world opens up to you a whole new perspective on how government works, on how banks work, on how institutions and education and why we have something called the police. Where does the word sheriff come from? Why do you have government? Once you begin to see how these words are used and put together, all of a sudden it opens up, as I said, a whole new perspective on how stuff is happening. Because in the world today, most people look at the things which are happening in this world and they can't make heads or tails out of it. It doesn't make any sense at all. It's destructive, it's lunacy, it's chaos. But in point of fact, the things which are happening in this world are not chaos at all. It is very well planned, organized, and directed. There is a hidden agenda, so to speak. And it's been my desire to uncover this hidden agenda that uses terms and emblems and symbols. Let me give you an example of how words, my friend William Henry says you put an S in front of the word word and it becomes swords. The words are swords. They are cutting things. Humans are word responsive creatures. We respond to people's words. When you begin to see how words are used, let me give you an example of the magic. Why do you have to go to court? You go to court because you play basketball on a court. You play tennis on a court. How do you play tennis on a court? You play with a racket. Why? Because the people that develop it know it's a racket. That's where we get the term. Consequently, you need to understand that the words which are used by government and by education and by the systems under which we live are not by chance. In a court, the whole idea in a court is to put the ball back in the other guy's court. So this team of attorneys, they stand up and throw the ball back at the other team. Now the ball's in their court. They have to get up and throw the ball back into that court. The judge wears a black robe. Why does a judge wear a black robe? Well, the same reason Catholic priests wear black robes. Rabbis wear black robes. The judges wear black robes. You wear a black robe. For many years, young people graduating from university and college wear a black robe. What's this stuff with a black robe? It has to do with the planet Saturn. Saturn is the god that inhibits. He's the inhibitor and the law god, the god of law who inhibits, who holds back. He holds back everything and teaches you a lesson the hard way. Saturn. And women were told in the ancient world to listen to their god Saturn, who incidentally was called Lord of the Rings. Okay? And consequently, they're still making movies in Hollywood on Lord of the Rings, the planet Saturn. Women were told to listen to their god, the Lord of the Rings, so they were wearing an ear ring. Men were to get married before Saturn, their god, so they would wear a wedding ring. Consequently, the king would be crowned before Saturn. Saturn would be the round crown or the corona, the ring. And so once you understand that courts, why when you go into a court is there a fence with a gate and people sit on the outside, and then when your name is called, you go through the gate? What is this gate all about? It separates the people from the governmental arrangement so that when you're sitting on the outside, you're no part of what's going on in the court. Let me give you an example of how this stuff works, and it's a very quick example. There are two basic kinds of law under the law of magic. There are two kinds of laws that govern the earth. One is called the law of the land, L-A-N-D. And we've heard that term, law of the land. Why do you use that term, the law of the land? Because that's where people live, is on land. But there's an opposing law which is far more important, far, far more powerful. It is called the law of water. It was developed under the old Druidic system in Europe, which can trace its history back through the Roman Empire, through the Vatican, and ultimately back to the Phoenician Canaanites in the Middle East, of what we today call Phoenicia. Cana was called back what we call today Israel and Lebanon. Syria, that was called which we've all heard in relation to the Bible. Cana is a Phoenician word meaning bankers, merchant bankers. Well, the Phoenician Canaanites set up a system of merchant banking and had their Phoenician Canaanite symbols and words connected to their societies, their banking societies. We're talking about in the Middle East. And then through the Greece and ultimately through Rome and then into Britannia and ultimately into this country comes an ancient Druidic Phoenician Canaanite magical system of finance, government, education, and all of it is right in front of you. But if you don't understand what the words are and what the words mean, you're never going to figure out how this stuff works. And I will guarantee you, no matter how educated you might think you are in the realm of business and government and education, I will guarantee you, you have no idea in the world how banks really work. And I will guarantee you, you have no idea in the world how government actually, in fact, works. We all have a cursory understanding of what we think is going on. That's not it. You need to understand that when, even on your check, when you're writing a check, the place where you put your name on a check, look at that line, what you're signing on, and get a magnifying glass, and you will find that's not a solid line to sign your name on. That is written. It's a typed written sentence that's been honed down to microscopic size. Get a magnifying glass and read on a check what is said where you sign your name. That's why the attorneys tell you, you better check the small print. The small print is ultra small. Where you sign your name on a check is saying something. Go back and read it. Consequently, you need to understand that according to the old Phoenician Canaanite system, which we call today our judicial, educational and judicial system, there is no law in this country or in the Western world, no law, federal, state, county, city, commercial, it makes no difference. There is no law on the books anywhere in this country that applies to you as an individual creature. There is no law because the people who designed the system thousands of years ago realized that there's two of you. There's the one that your mother gave birth to, that God created, so to speak, and even your mother didn't know what you were doing. Even your father and your mother have no idea what you're thinking or what you will do. You don't even know. So consequently, they have no control over you, your flesh and blood self. But somebody has to control this show. And so consequently, the ancient Phoenician Canaanites developed a system by which they would assign to every person a second you. And this is the way it works in America. There is two of you. Just as there are two states in this country, of every state is two states. You have the state of Nevada and Nevada State. You have Cal State, California State, and State of California. Not the same thing at all. California State, according to the law, is one thing. State of California is totally different. Has nothing to do with each other at all. It's the difference between being a lawyer and an attorney. Has nothing to do with them at all. It's totally separate words, means totally separate things. Consequently, when you understand how words and terms are used and symbols are used, then we go back to the idea of the court. And as I said, there is no law in this country on any books that applies to you. None. All law in the Western civilization applies only to cooperations, co-ops. All law applies only to corporations, period, across the board. No other, end of sentence. Consequently, there is no law that applies to you personally, so consequently, the system has made each one of you a corporation. And how now do you distinguish which one, when someone's addressing you, that they're addressing you as the one that your mother gave birth to, or the corporate you? Very simple. According to British law, When you sign your name, upper and lower case, that is applying to your body. Your flesh and blood self is spelled, according to British and American law, upper and lower case, capital letter, lower case. That's you, your personal self. There is no law that can be applied to an upper and lower case name, period. No law at all can be applied to an upper and lower case name because there is no law over you. Therefore, every piece of important bills, insurance, driver's license, identification, taxes, I don't care what it is. If it's a piece of business, period, in any kind of way, shape, or form, your name must, by law, international maritime admiralty banking law, your name must appear in all capital letters. You will never get a bill or anything that has your name upper and lower case because there is no law that applies to an upper and lower case name, period. So if Sears is going to send you a bill, if you go into Baskin-Robbins or Sears and you order a pair of shoes, what are you going to do? They're going to give you a ticket, and you're going to put it on your bill, and then they're expecting you to pay the bill. And consequently, they're going to charge you. Well, that's the same thing. You go into a courtroom. They're going to read out the charges. And the cop gave you the ticket, and you have been charged with speeding or whatever. And therefore, you have to pay the charge. Well, once you understand that in America, according to our laws in America, you cannot pay a bill. Did you know that? According to international banking law, Americans cannot pay a bill. So when you say, well, I got to pay this, I'll pay that bill, well, that's a term that we use. But in point of fact, lawfully, you cannot pay a bill. You can discharge a debt. You cannot pay a bill. So consequently, you need to understand, what do you mean discharge a debt? Now it gets back to the court again. Now it gets back to the symbols and emblems of why the judge wears a black robe. Saturn, the god who is the inhibitor, the god of occult law, the mystical god Saturn, Lord of the Rings, who is in charge of and controls all occult law in the universe. This is why today we know that Saturn was referred to as El, E-L. El is a name that was given to the planet Saturn. And therefore, if you are worshiping Saturn, you represent the law, you are referred to in church today as an elder. How did you get to be an elder? You got to be an elder because you were one of the elites. How did you get to be an elite? You got elected. Because through elections, all of our system is based on occult, mystical words and terms going back to the planet Saturn, going back to the Phoenician Canaanite system of banking. Incidentally, where do you find a bank? We go to banks all the time. Where do you find a bank? Banks are on both sides of a river. They're called river banks. What does a river bank do? It directs the flow of the currency. Your money is referred to as the currency. This is why when you go to court, you have the current, electricity, because it's the juice. And if you don't have the juice, you don't have it. So if you don't have the juice, you can't capitalize. Capital is a Latin word meaning money. Consequently, Caesar ruled from what was referred to in history books, Caesar ruled from up on the hill. It was called Capitol Hill, Capitoline Hill, with the Senate. You need to understand that Washington, D.C., as a Jesuit Catholic establishment under international maritime admiralty law, and once you begin to see how the system of the ancient Catholic system, the Jesuits, the ancient Roman Empire, the Phoenician Canaanite banking system, is all part of a world-dominating system. And once you figure out how the key to understanding all of this, all of a sudden the whole world opens up to you, and you say, oh, now I see why there were Twin Towers in New York. New York the Empire State. You need to do some homework on the term Twin Towers and find out that it goes back to Jacob and Boaz of the Phoenician Canaanites. All throughout Europe, churches all had twin towers. You better go back and find out what is connected to New York and how New York comes from the York Rite in England. There's a very sinister, frightening, interesting symbolism that has been imposed upon this country, and the people have no idea in the world what's going on. So I'm just saying, if you want to open up a whole can of worms for yourself, and for the first time begin to see how magical use of words and terms and symbols are used, you need to start looking at the world of the occult in politics and religion. Like my mother used to say, there's never been a political movement in the world that wasn't a little religious, and there's never been a religion that wasn't political. Religion, politics, and commerce are the three legs of the stool on which world order sits. And all of this stuff today, Washington, D.C., government, banking, all goes back to the Phoenician, Canaanite system, and ancient Phoenicia, ancient Babylonian Sumeria. And this is why the work of Zecharia Sitchin is so important. This is where the kings of England get their concept of the divine right of kings. What are you talking about, divine right? All of this is part of a subject which I call ancient mysticism that dominates the Western civilization. I'm telling you, this is very serious, and it's absolutely incredible how much people don't know about this system. And I want to thank you for letting me introduce this concept to you. My name is Jordan Maxwell. Last name Maxwell. Jordan is Jordan. I'm a speaker here at the conference in San Mateo. I normally speak on subjects at UFO conferences on UFO-related subjects. All of my life I've been a believer. Like most young men, I was always fascinated with the subject, and intuitively I felt there was something more to this universe than just what I was seeing. And so I've always been a believer in the existence of UFOs. But there's a very big difference between being a believer and a knower, someone who's actually, in fact, had a confrontation with something like that. And that happened for me in 1994. I was invited to speak at a UFO conference in Mesquite, Nevada, a very large conference. And afterwards, I was driving back on a Sunday morning with two friends, and we decided just before we got into Las Vegas to drive up to Rachel, Nevada, which is just north of Las Vegas, about 130 miles. And it's the site of the famous Area 51. And we had never been there. The three of us had never been there, heard about it. And Joe and Pat Travis, the owner of the Little Ailey Inn, the big restaurant motel, they knew me from my radio shows and videos, etc., but they had always invited me to come up, but I never did. And so we decided on a lark just to turn around and rather than coming back to LA, we just decided to go up to Little Alien. So we drove up there and had a delightful time meeting with everyone. And then that night, when they were closing the restaurant, I asked Joe and Pat, the owners, where do we go to see UFOs? Where do all the tourists go? And Joe said, well, you actually don't have to go anywhere. Just sit out on the parking lot, and if they want to find you, they will. And so Pat said, well, if you want to go where everyone else goes, you go right back on the highway and turn right and go south all the way back to Las Vegas and go 20 miles. At the 20-mile mark, pull off, and you will see a big mailbox. That's the famous black mailbox that everyone knows out there. That's where the best viewing site for possible UFO sightings seems to be. So it's 20 miles south, which is heading, as I said, back to Las Vegas. So 11:30 at night, my friend, my lady friend in the front seat, my publisher is in the back seat, and I'm driving. I get out on the highway, and instead of turning right, I turn left and go north. I have no idea why. And the lady with me, she didn't realize it. Paul Tice, my publisher, he didn't realize it. We're driving north like we knew what we were doing. And we got to the 20-mile mark north, which Rachel is 130 miles north of Las Vegas. So now we're 150 miles north of Las Vegas, out in the high desert of Nevada. After midnight, it's totally overcast. From horizon to horizon, totally overcast. And then we discovered we've gone the wrong way. So it was decided that we'll turn around, we'll go back, stay overnight, and come and go to the right place tomorrow night. So I stopped the car right where the car came to a stop, middle of the night, 150 miles north of Las Vegas, totally overcast. There was a wide dirt road right there going out into the desert. And the wide dirt road was very level and well kept. And so Ivy and Paul became very agitated. They wanted to drive out into the desert. And I said, you're in the desert. You're 150 miles into the desert. What are you going to see out there that you're not going to see here? And besides, it's totally overcast. You're not going to see anything anywhere. And they were very belligerent about it and said, no, we've got to go out in the desert. Well, let's just go out for a few minutes. And so I said, okay. So we drive out maybe a mile, if that. And all of a sudden, I got a very overwhelming sensation that we've done something wrong. And it was extremely powerful feeling I had that it was very I have felt this feeling at other times, and I was right. So I said, I don't know what we're doing here, but I'm getting out of here because there's something going on and I feel it and I don't like it. I want to get out of here. And I stopped the car and I backed it up and turned it around, and Paul and Ivy became unglued. They absolutely wanted to get out for a few minutes, and I said, I don't want to stay here. There's something going on here, and I don't know what it is, and I don't like it. So Paul and Ivy talked me into it to at least stay for a few minutes. I said, all right, but if I get in this car and the engine starts, you better be in the car because I'm serious. I'm leaving. So, and I was on edge. I got out. We shut the car. We shut the lights off in the car. I don't know if you've ever been on a desert where there was absolutely no light. It's total black. You have to hold on to the car to know where it is. You can't see anything. You can only hear each other. And we were only out of the car more than maybe a minute at the most. And all of a sudden, just north of us, the cloud began to open up, and like a little bit of an oval began to kind of open up and then stop. And of course, in total darkness, any opening in the cloud you see immediately. And so we watched it as it kind of broke away and opened up a little bit, and then it stopped. And Ivy says, look at that, the clouds just opened. And when she said that, through that opening came two white, disc-shaped, bluish white, more white than blue, bluish white, glowing disc-shaped things, which immediately appeared to be, to my way of thinking, a hologram, because there was no detectable metal superstructure, and absolutely no sound, period. Just two white disc-shaped things, and they weren't flying, zipping through with the lights zipping through. I'm talking about the size that the moon would appear in the nighttime sky. Two white glowing objects came in very slow. They were not flying as such. They appeared to be just electronically or magnetically floating. And as they floated overhead, 5 more came in behind them. And at that point, I totally went ballistic. I was absolutely, and I don't mind admitting it, totally frightened, because I have never seen this kind of awesome beauty that radiated fear. If you've never been there, you can't appreciate what I'm talking about. But if you are like a child, a small child taken to a zoo and brought up to the cage of a gorilla, the overwhelming fear that grips a child, that's the kind of fear I felt. Because I'm smart enough to know that this kind of technology is one of two things. It's either of another world, which if it is from somewhere else, it's frightening. Who are they and what are they doing here? Or second, if it is of our work, if it's from the earth, then that tells me we are far more technologically advanced than I ever suspected. And that's frightening. Either way, I was in total fear. I'm thinking, my God, what is this? 7 white, glowing, disc-shaped things, as I said, making no sound, no metal superstructure. They began to move over our heads and began to change places as if they were doing some sort of a little routine to show us what they could do. And they would drop down and move right over our heads. And Ivy and Paul were ecstatic. They were like children at Disneyland. They were jumping around and saying, God, look how beautiful they are. All the time, I was not impressed. I was legitimately frightened. They didn't seem to be sensitive to what I was feeling. I'm thinking, this is scary stuff. I don't know what this is, and I don't know who it is, but whatever this is and whatever it represents is a technology and a knowledge that is far superior to anything I have ever in my life come across. And that bothers me. I don't know who these people are, and I don't know what they're doing, but if they have this kind of technology and they radiate, and that's something you need to remember, they radiated a fear off of them. You could feel it. You're in the presence of something awesome, fearful. And I finally decided after about 1.5 to 2 minutes of watching this that I've had enough. And I got in the car and started the engine up.
We've got to stop tape.
That's it.
Put another tape in for you.
Yeah. Yes, and at this point I should say I was born and raised about 2 miles from Gulf Breeze, Florida. And I grew up from about the age of 7 or 8 having otherworld experiences. All of my life I have been involved in otherworld experiences for whatever reason. And I have experienced many things as a teenager and as a child and even in adult years that were just startling things. Nothing compared to this, nothing. I was, as I said, even as an adult, I was legitimately frightened because I knew that we were in the presence of something awesome, So I got in the car after about a minute and a half, 2 minutes of standing there shaking while this display is going on. And Paul and Ivy were just jumping up and delighted. And, you know, they wouldn't have minded if the things came down and landed. Me, I've been gone. And so I finally decided, I told him, I said, I'm leaving, get in the car. And I also have to say at this point, this is one of the things, we all have things in our lives that we will live to regret. And I do regret doing this. But I got so scared I decided to leave quickly. I regret doing that. I wish I would have had the intestinal fortitude to stay there to see what was going to happen, because this was a monumental display. Maybe it's just as well we didn't stay there to find out what was going to happen. So I got in the car and I cranked the engine, and they got in the car because they realized I was serious. And so they rolled the windows down and leaned out the window backwards so that they could watch while I'm driving away. And I tried to drive because I knew the road was straight. I figured if I just leave the lights off and drive straight, because there were two of me at that time. There was the emotional, unconnected me, and then there's the rational me. The emotional me was thinking, I don't want to turn the lights on because they'll see us. But the other part of me was thinking, you know, with this kind of technology, they saw you coming, you know. I mean, the Army can pick you up late at night. Naturally, they can. Then I decided, look, if we're going to get out of here, just flip on the lights and let's get out. And I flipped the lights on, put my foot right to the floor, and I tore out to the highway. When I did, Paul sitting in the back seat, Ivy in the front seat, leaning out the window backwards, they went totally ballistic to each other. They started screaming uncontrollably to each other, yelling, screaming at the top of their voice at each other. And what was happening is all 7 of these beautiful things came right down over the top of the car, zoom, right down over us. I wasn't seeing, I just saw a couple of them moving around, and they were moving quickly. And I looked out and I could see them moving around, and I thought, my God, we were in trouble. And I was heading to the highway as fast as I could down that dirt road. Ivy and Paul are screaming because they are, you know, totally blown away now by this kind of attention. Now it's not just that we saw them. They know we're here, and they're following us. I hit the highway. Just before the highway, I started slowing down because I was doing maybe 80 or 90 miles an hour on a dirt road. And I saw the highway coming up, so I slowed down quick enough because I didn't want to overshoot it and really wreck the car. And when we hit the highway, I turned the car and it skidded onto the highway, and I threw it in park, shut the lights off immediately, and jumped out because I felt safer on the highway. I'm not on military property. I just felt safer. We're on the highway now. We jumped out, all 3 of us, and the 7 of those saucer-shaped things, no sound again, they had stopped about 2 blocks back, about a block and a half to 2 blocks back, and had already begun to go back out into the desert, like they had chased us away, and now they're going back out into the desert, and all of a sudden they went just like this into the clouds, but gone. We stood out on the highway 12:45 to 1 o'clock, totally overcast, totally dark, the lights on and shaking, and there were all kinds of emotions being displayed. There was, I can't tell you the kind of silliness and craziness that was going on between the 3 of us. We all 3, it began to occur to us what we had been involved in and how severe and frightening this thing really was. So, of course, driving back to the hotel, the motel, we're shaking, and we're trying, and the question of the hour was, whose technology did we witness tonight? Was it ours or theirs? Unanimous. We all agreed this is not human. It may be human built, but the knowledge that it took to do this was not of our originality. I should explain, too, that when we were speeding back out to the highway, Paul and Ivy were getting the show. They were watching it. they were telling me that what the 7 of these disc-shaped things were doing, they would come together in a circle without touching each other, but all of this in a second. They would come together in a circle and blow out into a 7-pointed star, come together in a circle, blow out into a 7-pointed, back and forth, and they followed us out at 90 miles an hour. They were doing that, following us out just that way, just that quick. That kind of technology we don't have, to be able to put into a perfect circle, block out into and follow you out. At first, when I first saw these things, I thought it was a hologram. But the light reflecting off of these, or emanating from these objects, reflected on the clouds above them. At this point, I today do not know what it was, in fact, that we saw. But when we got back to the hotel, the motel that night, we decided to stay overnight, of course, and so going into the motel that we were staying at, you walk directly into the bathroom. When you walk through the door, the bathroom's in front of you, and there are 2 bedrooms, one on each side. One had 1 bed, one had 2. I was not about to sleep by myself that night, so I talked Ivy into sleeping in the room with me, and Paul could have the other room. I said, you go over there and sleep by yourself. So we laid in bed talking about what did we see tonight. And we pretty well had decided that it was not of this world. Finally, when we fell off to sleep, the next morning, I got up late. I went over to the restaurant. Paul and Ivy had already gotten up and gone over to the restaurant, and they were having breakfast and talking to the townspeople. And they had a big group of people around the table, and they were talking about experience. So when I walked into the restaurant, I thought that what they were talking about is the experience the 3 of us had had the night before. But they were talking about what happened to them last night in the motel room. Paul said that he, about a half hour, 45 minutes, something like that, after he fell asleep, he woke up totally awake, and something picked him up. Actually picked him up and set him up in bed involuntarily. And the moment he sat up, a light came on over his head like a little dim night light. And he looked up to see an alien's face with the typical alien's face with the bubble eyes, but it was glowing, and you could see through it. You could see the ceiling through it as if it were a hologram of some kind. And it was glowing, looking at him, and he said it slid across the ceiling, went across the ceiling, hit the wall, and came down to where it was even with him sitting in bed. And at that moment, in his head, he began to see the room going in circles. He could see the window behind him going around, the door going around. The room was moving in circles. Obviously, it was some sort of an optical thing that was happening. And he said, but the face stood still while the room began to rotate, and it telepathically asked him, and he said, I understood it totally clear. It telepathically asked him, who are you and what are you doing here? And he said, and I was totally frightened to death because I kept trying to communicate with it in thought-wise because I knew that's the way it communicates. And he said, I kept trying to think, how do you communicate with something that doesn't, communicate like we do? And he said, and then all of a sudden, in his mind, he began to see his whole life going backwards quickly. I've heard that this happens when you are dying, as you see your entire life go by you. He said, I saw everything in my whole life go by me quickly. Obviously, this entity was able to go through your memory track of some kind of a memory track that your brain has. And therefore it was finding out who he was. And then it said to him telepathically, you're all right, you're okay. And then it went through the wall, everything stopped, it went through the wall and disappeared. But Ivy, in my room, was laying so that she could see the door. And she said she saw the glowing on the wall, but she couldn't tell what the light was because it wasn't very bright. And she said, but when she opened her eyes to see the glowing of the light in Paul's room, which was the face on the wall, a little red, tiny little red dot of light came through Paul's room and came in and hovered over her. A little red, tiny light, which incidentally is in Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters. Every time you saw the saucers go by, you saw this little light going around. Ivy said she saw this little light come in and hover right above her, and at that moment she was totally paralyzed. Couldn't move, couldn't cry out, couldn't do anything. All she could do is breathe and just. And she said she lay there totally paralyzed, looking at this light, and when the glowing went through the wall, that little red light went out and followed it, was gone. Now, I slept through all of this. I didn't see any of it. I'm just telling you what they said. But I know them, and they're not given to making up stories, either one of them. And so I said to them at the time in the restaurant, I said, well, they didn't wake me. And Pat, the owner of the restaurant, she said, no, they know who you are. They just wanted to know who your companions were. And so that was the experience up there. When I got back to Los Angeles, about 3 months later, I was in San Diego working at a company down there as an editor for a magazine. And I decided, this was in late spring, I decided to rent a convertible and drive back up to Area 51 by myself, and no one knew this, and go back out to where we had this experience by myself, which I did. And I drove out there in the afternoon when the sun was still, it was dusk, but the sun was still up, because I wasn't about to go out there by myself at night. And I parked the car in the convertible. I parked the car. I sat on the back hood with my feet in the back seat, and I said to them, I said, look, I know you're here, okay? And I want you to know that I don't mind doing whatever it is I'm supposed to do. If I've got a destiny in life or a mission or whatever it is, I don't mind doing it. But if it has something to do with you, then I'm going to ask you for two favors. Do not abduct me, because I don't want to go anywhere. And don't frighten me in my bedroom. I don't want to wake up and find something in my bedroom I can't handle, okay? So don't mess with me, and don't scare me to death, and I don't want to go anywhere. But if I'm supposed to do something, if there's a divine plan of some sort where I'm supposed to play, then open the doors, show me what I am to do, and leave me alone. And I thanked them, and I got back in the car and drove back, and that was it. About a month later, now we're at the beginning of summer, I get a phone call from Paul, my publisher, who lives in Escondido, right down by San Diego. And he's telling me about this young lady who is a past life regressionist. And he said, you got to go see this girl. She's sensational. So I called her, made an appointment. She's down on Coronado Island. Her name was Karen, K-I-R-I-N. And I went down to see Karen, and she, being a very spiritually inclined, past life regressionist type of person, she has you lay on the table and take your rings off and your watch, and she's setting up the candles and lighting candles and doing some sort of a little ritual thing. And I'm just laying there watching her. I mean, Paul says she's great. We'll find out. And she's talking to someone. And I'm laying there watching her, and she's talking to someone. And I said, who are you talking to? And she said, oh, I'm talking to your friends who brought you here. And I said, oh, okay. Brought me to your house? She said, no. Your friends who brought you to the earth. You've come here from another place, and they have brought you here to do something. I said, I've often wondered about that. Where did I come from? I mean, really, what am I doing here? And she says, well, and I'm just telling you what she said. She said, they are Pleiadians, and they have brought you here to do something. And you are ultimately going to be a emissary, was the word, an emissary for them. They're going to channel through you. They're going to use you, and they will speak through you. And they have been preparing you for many, many years. I said, oh, okay. I don't know. And then she goes on lighting some more candles, and then she starts talking again, and then she's laughing. And I said, what are you laughing at? And she said, oh, they told me something funny about you. And I said, what? And she said, they said that about a month ago you drove up to see Joe and Pat up at Little Alien in a convertible you rented, and you sat on the back of the hood with your feet in the back seat and you told them you didn't mind doing what you're supposed to do, but you didn't want to be abducted or frightened in your bedroom, and they thought that was funny. Now, at that moment, I became very disorientated. I said, whoa, nobody knew I did that. No one knew I did that. I didn't tell anyone. And she said, yeah, they knew. She said, they're telling me you went back out there because you didn't want to go out there at night because they scared you the last time. But that you went out there and sat on the back of your car, and they thought that was funny. And I said, why would they see humor in a human being frightened? And she said, because if you knew who you really were, you know, that would sound kind of silly. And so I respected that. I am just telling you what she said. But to me, that was a very powerful emotional experience talking to her, because she told me things that no one could have known but myself. And she was very accurate. I'm just telling you this because I believe that there is, in point of fact, something going on in the world where, for a lack of a better term, extraterrestrial, alien, if you please. I don't like the word alien because I know what it means. Extraterrestrial or other world intelligences, higher life forms, are somehow or another intermingling with us. I am totally convinced that that's been the case since day one. I have become obviously more convinced now. This is merely one experience of about 20 on that same level that I have had, which continues to drill home the point to me that there is some sort of a higher intelligence watching us. Who they are, I have my own suspicions.
And speaking of that, in your research, have you found any evidence of this throughout history, religion, or
Yes.
or archaeology?
Yes. And it did not start, this kind of ideas did not start with von Däniken or my friend, some of the other authors like Zechariah Sitchin. There are many good and profoundly great authors writing on this kind of subject, but it didn't start with them. If you go back into the Bible, into the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, in Genesis is just filled with such stories of angels. As a matter of fact, in Genesis 18, there was a story, a very famous story in the Jewish tradition about Abraham was visited by 3 men. And it says 3 men come walking up into Abraham's camp, and Abraham went out and met them and asked them to stay for dinner, the scripture says. And the 3 men said no, they were in a hurry to go somewhere on business, and the scripture says that he insisted that they at least stay for dinner. So they said, all right, but make it quick. So the wife, Sarah, fixed dinner for them. After eating, they thanked him for his hospitality, and the scripture says in Genesis 18 that the 3 men thanked him, got up, and excused themselves and went off. And it says, this was the Almighty God, the Creator, with 2 accompanying angels. Now, they looked like men. They sat down and had dinner with you. They got up, they thanked them and walked off, and this was the Almighty God with 2 accompanying angels. I don't know, I wasn't there. This is what the scripture says. Then also in Genesis, there is a story of Lot in Sodom and Gomorrah, where some angels came to visit him, and it says the homosexuals in that town, the scripture said, thought that these were handsome, extraordinary, good-looking men. There are other stories in Genesis and in the Bible about angels who forsook their proper dwelling place and took on human form and started messing around with women. And the Bible says, along with many other holy writings of the ancient world, talk about aliens who took on human form, not just in the Hebrew tradition, but many of the ancients had the same kind of stories, where alien life forms, angels if you please, took on human form and began to mess around with women and got them pregnant. This tells me their plumbing worked. Second, I know women are not going to fall in love and go to bed with something that is a hideous monster, so they must have been very good-looking men. All of that frightens me, because there may be some around here, we don't even know who they are. They appear to be men. They appear to be human. And of course, the Jewish tradition in Judaism teaches in the Bible that God made us in His image and likeness. The point being in the Hebrew, meaning in your bodily form, the way you are designed, is because the gods look like that. You look like them, they look like you. Why? Because they created you from them. I tend to think that there is a modicum of truth in that. Maybe it's a beautiful story. It tells you something, but I think there might be something more to this story. That being the case, this is why I'm concerned about world government, world religion, and where we are going as a human race. Who is in point of fact in charge on this earth? Because I am very good at, because I've been doing it for a long time, pattern recognition. I have been able to trace for many years patterns in political, religio, philosophical movements, words, terms, symbols, emblems, national coats of arms, halotry, words, as I said, which can be traced backwards and go all the way back into history. I mean, as far back as the Hittites, that were using double-headed eagles. The eagle itself was used as a symbol for the sun orders in the ancient Sumerian, Phoenician, Canaanite system. The sun orders were symbolized by the eagle. Secret societies of priesthoods used the eagle. The Greeks used it. The Babylonians used it. The Romans were very big on the Roman eagle. And this is where we get it from. America, the great American bald eagle, no, it's not American. This goes all the way back to fascist Nazism that was born in the Roman Empire, which can be traced back, that eagle representing the sun, the rising sun of a new world order, goes all the way back into the most ancient of times. I believe that what we are viewing today in America and in the world is a continual pattern recognition that something very big is going on, and we are merely the people who are experiencing it now. I would suggest that we are in serious trouble because we have not read the symbols.
What type of serious trouble?
Because if you were a Jewish family living in Berlin in the mid to early 1930s, if you were savvy enough to understand what was going on in the country, the mood of the country, the symbols, the terms, the words, the catchphrases, where the political thinking was going, how it was moving, you would, of course, as there were many Jewish families that began to say, we better get out of here because we can see where it's going. They're looking for a scapegoat. They're looking for someone to blame, and they have this whole thing about this divine right of an Aryan super race, and that stuff is still going on in England today with the Her Majesty and the divine right of kings. This racism, anti-Semitism, fearful and frightening totalitarian thinking has pervaded cultures all the way back into Samaria. And I am saying that what we are seeing today in America, and as it is being played out on the world scene, is the same identical words, terms, symbols, catchphrases, emblems. The same steps are now being taken by the so-called, quote, powers that be, which ultimately brought about Adolf Hitler. And to my personal way of thinking, I think that that's what we're heading for again. Another period in which the world is going to wake up, as Europe and America did when it was almost too late. I think we're going to awaken one day to find out that we've all been too relaxed and entertained and watching television and being entertained with all the cares of life, never realizing what is going on in this country. Because, and this is important to me, not that I'm Jewish, but because I appreciate that it doesn't have anything to do with being Jewish. It has to do with scapegoats. It has to do with picking somebody, and whoever it might be. It may be the blacks tomorrow. It may be homosexuals. It may be Hispanics. It doesn't matter who they are. They'll be the enemy that needs to be dealt with. I think that this has always been the case in politics, that the powers that be behind the throne need to have the people agitated, and I think that this is what's happening. I'm very fearful because this country, I believe, is in point of fact the last great hope for the divine plan of the ages to bring freedom and liberty and freedom to the earth and to allow every person to be free and unmolested. But I think that that's very quickly now leaving us. I think we're losing the great country. I mean, all one has to do if you want to debate this, I don't think there's anything to debate. I think if you just are aware of the CIA, which was called the OSS in the Second World War, became known after the Second World War as the CIA. CIA originally, the OSS was originally founded by men who were members of an order called the Knights of Malta. It is a Roman secret society of powerful Freemasons who have operated in Europe for many, many hundreds of years. The Knights of Malta gave us and along with the kindred orders like the Knights Templars, the Order of Knights Templars, who were the international bankers in Switzerland, who were melting down teeth from Jewish people that they had killed. The Knights Templars of Switzerland. This is why Switzerland's never in any war, because this is where the Templars call home. This is the international banking. You don't mess with the boss lives. I have done a lot of research in which I have helped Jewish organizations on this whole problem of international bankers out of Switzerland. So I think that there's something going on here very big.
Definitely agree. Do you have any idea what that is?
Yes, I certainly do. I haven't spent 40 years with this subject not to know.
Okay.
Have we got a rundown on
To discuss here.
It's up to you.
You were saying what?
Well, I was saying in the time of Richard Nixon, when Richard Nixon was being hounded out of office, and he should have been, the thought was, how much did Richard Nixon know, and when did he stop knowing it? Meaning that if he didn't know the Watergate break-in was taking place, then what kind of a president is he that has no idea what his own people are doing? Or second, if he did and he lied about it, then why is he president and lying to us? Okay, so either way, he was not fit to be president because he was either incompetent or a liar, and either way, he shouldn't be in that office. I am saying the same thing today, that the powers that be in this country who have control over investigative law enforcement, and don't make any mistake about this, that in the Justice Department there is a division of the Justice Department, as there is in large police forces around the nation. There is a department called the Department of Criminal Conspiracies Division. The Criminal Conspiracies Division of the Justice Department is there because there is, in point of fact, sometimes existing in this country criminal conspiracies. That's why you have a Criminal Conspiracies Division. I am saying, would it be considered a criminal conspiracy for individual corporations and companies and large banking institutions in America to put together the money and the technology and the raw materials to build Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany? Would that be considered a criminal conspiracy? Because in point of fact, Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime was built by American know-how, American money, General Motors, Ford Motor Company, General Electric, DuPont, You go down the line, all the major corporations in America were with Adolf Hitler in business. That's where he got the money. Because the German people were starving after the First World War. They were actually, in point of fact, starving in the streets. Their money was totally worthless. They had signed an armistice, and Germans don't usually give up in a fight. They had no alternative. They were totally broke, with no food, no ammunition, and they gave up in the First World War. Then comes this madman named Adolf Hitler, and he's talking about how we need to clean this situation up and get back on top again. And before you know it, he's starting to put people to work. There's money coming in, building Volkswagens and highways, and all of a sudden, about 10 years later, Germany becomes the most militaristic, most professionally trained, highly trained, well-fed, most highly equipped, standing military organization in the world, with their ships on the high seas, tank fleets, submarine fleets, rockets, standing armies throughout the world. They frightened the entire world. Where did they get the money? Somebody better trace the money, and they're going to trace it right back to New York City, Chase Manhattan Bank, Morgan Guaranty Trust, Citibank in Chicago. They're going to trace it back to all of the major financial institutions in America. They're going to trace back General Motors, Ford Motor Company, Chrysler, General Electric, Union Carbide. Go down the line, all of the major corporations in America knew who Adolf Hitler was and what he was going to do, and they were supplying him with money, materials, logistics. They built Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany here in America. And don't ever forget it. Because I believe, I believe that the same people who gave birth to the concept of this Aryan super race are in control of this government at this time, and the Jews that are alive today don't know how to read the symbols. If you know how, as a detective, if you are trained as a detective to know what to listen for, what to hear, and if you're highly tuned and working for the CIA or some organization like that, you sit in on an interrogation. You know what you're listening for. You know how this thing flows. And when certain words are used, certain terms are used, you know where it's coming from. So I'm saying, unless and until people in this country, we don't have leaders, we have misleaders, but until somebody learns how to read the symbols, know what the words mean, know what the terms mean, and begin to put these pieces together, we're not going to be awake in time to discover that the same people who built Adolf Hitler have done it again. And this is what I'm very concerned about, because I know that it has nothing to do with Jewish. It has to do with a totalitarian dictatorship that's been coming for a long time. And it fell through in times past. It didn't work. But it seems to be working now, and the greatest single enemy to this totalitarian system is a free people who can do their own thinking, investigate everything, and have the ability to confront the powers that be. And of course America was called the land of the free and the home of the brave. We are not free and we are not brave. We have learned what to kiss and when. We have learned that you do not do anything in this country and talk about any subject that's going to get you hurt, because there's an old saying, it's very dangerous to be right when your country is wrong. I think that we are living in a country today which is being manipulated, exploited, and maneuvered into something that the politicians are now calling a new world order, which is in point of fact the same identical words that Adolf Hitler used in his public speeches when he began to talk about how the superior race was going to lead the world in the new age to a new world order, a new order based on a supreme rulership of the masses by an Aryan super race. And this is the same words that the President of the United States, congressmen, and all of the so-called elite in this country are using, the same Nazi terms, the same fascist terms. As a matter of fact, if you recall, and you might not recall, but there will be many in the audience who will, that the symbol for fascism, if you go back to a law dictionary and look up, or in any dictionary, and look up the word fascism, which is the concept of world totalitarian state, the symbol for fascism is a fasci. A fasci in Rome was a bundle of sticks tied together with a hatchet head. It was called a fasci. And today, on both sides of the presidential podium, where the president gives his State of the Union message, you will see it nightly on television, that room. Somebody's always making a speech in that room. The next time you see that room where the Congress and Senate meet, and you see the presidential podium, look on both sides of the podium. Don't look at the dunce talking. Look at the symbols on both sides of the podium where the president stands, and you will see fascis. Write to the Department of the State Department, and have them send you back something in an envelope, and look at the seal of the State Department. Two fascis crossing. That is a very ancient Roman Nazi fascist symbol, the crossing of the fascis. That is the symbol for the United States Senate. And today we're seeing synagogues being burned, Jewish people being shot by some lone crazy assassin. Make no mistake about it. There is no such a thing as a lone crazy assassin. There is an underlying, all-encompassing anti-Semitism which is growing in this country, and it has nothing to do with the American people, because generally speaking, the American people don't have brains enough to figure this out. There are some very evil people who are at the reins of government in this country, and unless and until somebody starts reading the symbols and understanding where this stuff comes from, we're heading for another Nazi Germany, and I don't want to see that happening in this country. Now, I believe that the UFO subject plays into this, not in the way that you would immediately think. I am not saying that those people who see and experience UFOs are fascists or Nazis. I'm saying that I think that the technology, which we are now calling the UFO experience, could very well be some extremely articulate, intelligent masterminds, and make no mistake about it, Nazi Germany had them. I mean, we went to the moon with good old American ingenuity, like Dr. Werner von Braun and all the other Nazis that were brought here under Operation Paperclip. God, if we only knew how much of our country is run on the whole pattern of Nazism. I mean, the very reason why a child gets vaccinated. All of these symbols and emblems are in hospitals, doctors' offices, government buildings. The story is just so amazing, and this is why it works. Because 99 9/10% of all of the American public have no idea in the world where any of this has come from. And they're going to wake up, as I said before, and discover we are in serious trouble. Because whoever has this kind of technology, and it's there, because I've experienced it, if it's from another world, that these UFOs are from another place, that's frightening. Because I don't know who they are, and I don't know what they've come here for. Or if some very highly technically brilliant, gifted, evil minds have taken this kind of technology and reversed engineered it to use it today, and therefore what we're seeing today is Nazi UFO technology. If that be the case, I am still frightened to death, because it implies we don't have anything to match this kind of technology, and anyone who does is going to be our masters. And America has always had enemies. And this is a whole story we could go into as to where Nazism really came from, and trace that back into Europe, and trace that back into the church, and trace the church history back to the 3rd and 4th century. Now you're getting into the secret societies behind the Roman Empire who used the swastika. All of a sudden, there's a whole world of knowledge that people who are well informed and who need to be, and of course this kind of information usually is considered to be a need to know information, and you don't need to know. I think it's time that America needs to know who is behind this UFO technology, where is it coming from, because it's legitimate and it's real, and I can show you positive proof that this kind of knowledge and this kind of technology was being worked on by the best minds that Adolf Hitler had working for him. And today, they are in America. They do motion pictures and television shows on this kind of stuff about Operation Paperclip. There were rat lines. The word is rat line. Look it up in any encyclopedia or dictionary. It will tell you that was a system by which the Vatican, Rome, the Vatican, produced passports, money, all of the papers, the official papers for all the top Nazis to be fled out of Berlin and out of Germany when they began to see the war going against the Nazi movement. The Vatican began to give out passes for all of the top Nazis to get out of the country. And they were sent to Uruguay, Paraguay, into South America, Mexico, into Washington, D.C. if they're really smart. And the Vatican saw to it that all of the top Nazis were taken out of the countries, all of the teachers, all the theoreticians, all the scientists. And today, happily, America is on top in a dog-eat-dog world because we got the best Nazis in the world working for us. Again, I'm saying you better do your homework. We are in serious trouble. This kind of UFO technology, which I told you about, represents, in my mind, a very serious threat to all of us. I, for one, feel that this is an idea whose time has come to investigate this openly, and let's see who the traitors are in this country. Let's see what's really going on in America today. Because if we don't, and we lose this country to a totalitarian dictatorship, and that's what it's coming to, the federal government is the boss. I don't care how free you think you are and what you can do. You do something this government doesn't want, they'll plant dope on you, they'll find something in your hotel room, they will do something and you'll be taken off, or like usually if you're a researcher, you'll just disappear and no one will know where you are and nobody wants to talk about it. I'm saying we better wake up and find out we're in trouble. I, for one, would like to be at the forefront of investigating this because I've had 40 years of experience doing it. So that's my personal feeling about our country, our time, and the UFO, the whole UFO subject. I believe it's very legitimate.
Wow. I'm riveted.
Anybody else?
The American flag with the fringe,
Fringe, the gold fringe on the flag.
I'm going to go grab our next. Go ahead and ask
Go
your
on.
question. I'm going to go.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a maritime flag which now puts our court systems.
Under maritime admiralty law. Yes. You see, there are two kinds of law. This is a subject I love. I've been talking about this for years. There are two kinds of law on the earth that rule the whole world, but most people don't know that. All over the world, all governments are ruled by what is called civil law. Civil law goes back to a Latin word, civili, which goes back to the word illi. Oh, God, I mean, you could go on for hours on this stuff. Civil law, which is called in all countries the law of the land. So you'll say, well, you can't do that because that's against the law of the land. The law of the land is civil law, Roman civil law, the law of the land. But there is a second law which also operates all over the earth identical. It's called UCC, Uniform Commercial Code. That is the law of God in the world of business. I don't care if you're in Japan, in Africa, in China, in Istanbul, Turkey. If you have a company, if you have a corporation, if you are doing business where you buy and sell and make money, you are operating on this earth under something called UCC, Uniform Commercial Code. Because if all countries worked on a different commercial code, then nobody could do business with anybody. You couldn't trust Japan to pay you. Japan couldn't trust America to pay them for the cars, because everybody has their own laws. Under the Caesars of Rome, they established under Caesar that all nations in the empire that do business, everybody plays on a level field. If you do business in Africa with China, you pay them. And if Africa does business with American companies, you pay them. You pay whatever it is you're doing business. You don't mess around. The most severe law in this world is called UCC, Uniform Commercial Code. It's the Bible of business on the earth. Uniform Commercial Code. Uniform Commercial Code is based directly on Vatican canon law, on the Roman canon law. Consequently, when a ship pulls into port, it pulls in and stops, and it's called in its berth. The ship is now in its berth. Because it is on the law of the high seas, or commercial maritime, UCC commercial law rules the seas. So when the ship pulls into its berth, the first thing the captain must do is to present a certificate of manifest to the port authorities, which means that the port authorities need to know how much is on this ship that you're bringing into our country and our economy. How many TVs, how many cars, whatever you're bringing, how much are you bringing into our economy. So you have to have a certificate of manifest of what is the value of your ship here. What are you doing? Consequently, when you are born, you come out of your mother's water. Therefore, you must have a birth certificate, a certificate of manifest, because you are a corporation-owned item. You are a human resource. This goes back to the German Nazi concept that every human coming out of their mother's water must be birthed. And therefore, you have to have a certificate, a manifest, to see how much this individual is going to make for us in our new world order. I'm telling you that until you understand the laws, the symbols, the emblems, what these words mean, you're never going to suspect how far gone we really are. Did you know, for instance, that your birth certificate is a security on the stock exchange in the New York stock market? Did you know that? Because if you order your birth certificate, get a new one, order your birth certificate, it'll only cost you, sometimes it's free, it'll only cost you a few dollars, order your birth certificate. On your birth certificate, all birth certificates in this country, on the bottom, it will tell you this is printed on security papers. Do not accept if not on full color security paper. Then on the right-hand corner, you will always have a series of numbers, red numbers, printed on the birth certificate. Those numbers are a security stock exchange number on the World Stock Exchange. You go to any good stock office and ask them, check these numbers in your computer and see how much this stock is worth, the certificate. And they will check it on the New York Stock Exchange and find your birth certificate is a stock on the stock exchange in America. Why? Because you are worth money to the international bank that bought you in 1930. We need to wake up. This is serious stuff.
Wow. That's great. You live in Los Angeles?
Yeah.